Jaime Lannister stood on the terrace overlooking the scorched courtyard of the Red Keep, golden hand resting on the stone balustrade. The sun was beginning to set over King's Landing, bathing the ancient city in a final glow before dusk swallowed its streets and shadows claimed the corners of the alleys. The hush of the twilight hour brought no peace to him, for his heart thundered with the knowledge of what he was about to do. Memories of his past misdeeds and darkest secrets weighed on him like an iron gauntlet, none heavier than the moment he had chosen to slay the Mad King. Yet here he was, on the brink of a deed that might eclipse even that infamous act, the deed that would seal Cersei's fate. She had brought him to the edge of madness, or so he thought. Night after night, Jaime had watched her transform from a cunning queen into something far more ruthless, bent on preserving power at any cost, even if it meant the realm would go down in flames. He had discovered the truth in pockets of quiet shame, in glimpses of her cruelty that she no longer bothered to mask. The love that once burned between them had decayed into an obsession laced with hatred, a twisted reflection of what they had once been. Jaime thought of the prophecy that had haunted Cersei, whispered words of a younger brother bringing her doom, and, ironically, he felt the shape of that fate pressing upon his own shoulders. He felt the cool breeze off Blackwater Bay rustle through his golden hair, a sensation that for a moment let him recall simpler days, days before he had pushed a child out a window, before the War of the Five Kings. Before all the betrayals and heartbreak that had led him to this dark hour. The city below clung to life, having suffered from starvation, uncertainty, and war. Smoke still lingered in the air from the last round of devastation. People walked with their heads down. Even the famed Street of Steel, once vibrant with hammer strikes, seemed sullen and quiet. Jaime swallowed hard, remembering that all he had done, each transgression, had been out of love for Cersei, or so he had convinced himself. Now, love had curdled and duty rose in its place. A single tear slipped down his cheek, which he dashed away with his flesh and blood hand. He could not afford to be seen crying, not here, not now. The realm had no more sympathy left for tears. What he was about to do demanded an iron will. He took a breath, tasting ash and salt, and turned his back on the city so he could face the doors that led into Cersei's private chambers. He had let the day pass without confronting her. He had let the hours slip by, telling himself he needed more time. But the clock of destiny had been ticking loudly in his mind ever since she had set out her final plan to tighten her grip on the Seven Kingdoms. It had become clear to him she would do anything, burn the city to cinders, break alliances, slaughter innocents, to keep herself on the throne. And so, after a day that felt too short, there was nothing left to do but take that last walk toward the final confrontation with the only woman he had ever loved. As he stepped into the corridor, the plush crimson carpets silenced his approach. The torches along the walls had been lit, casting flickering gold and red shadows across the polished marble columns. A pair of Lannister guards stood outside the ornate doors of Cersei's antechamber. At the sight of Jaime, they stiffened. Their eyes slid to the golden hand that glimmered in the torchlight, a symbol of both his rank and his tragic story. But neither spoke, for they sensed his authority outranked all. Wordlessly, Jaime motioned for them to leave. A moment's hesitation, a sidelong glance between the two soldiers, and then they clanked away in their steel and leather armor, boots echoing down the hallway. Jaime waited until the guard's footsteps faded before pushing open the door. He stepped into the antechamber, its lofty ceiling arching overhead, black and red drapes adorning tall windows. A table with gold filigreed legs stood in the center, and unrolled parchment left to sprawl across it. A goblet of wine, half-finished, remained in solitary vigil. Cersei was in the next chamber. He could feel her presence, a presence that had once filled him with desire and belonging. Now, that same presence coiled his guts into knots. He had never been more afraid in his life. Not even when the Mad King threatened to burn them all. Not even when, a lifetime ago, he had witnessed Aerys Targaryen's mania. This was a different fear, the fear of betraying his own blood, his twin, the mother of his children. But he had made his decision. He stepped forward, each footfall carrying him deeper into the hush that enveloped these walls. He passed a gilded mirror and caught his own reflection. He looked older than he remembered. Lines of worry creased his forehead, silver strands glinted in his hair. His green eyes seemed haunted, reflecting the weight of sins he could no longer count. He exhaled slowly and ran a hand through his hair, steeling himself with every inch of progress. No turning back, he thought, no respite this time. Pushing aside the heavy velvet curtain, he entered Cersei's bedchamber. She stood by the window, clad in a shimmering black gown embroidered with gold lions at the sleeves. A proud tilt to her chin, posture regal as ever, she did not turn to greet him. Her hair was cropped short, the way she had worn it since her walk of atonement, and though her beauty was still remarkable, an undercurrent of tension etched itself on her features. She did not need to look to know he was there. "Jaime," she said, her voice low, controlled. "I wondered if you'd come back to me tonight." She sipped from a crystal goblet, something stronger than wine, for the perfume wafting from it was bitter and pungent. He approached, the golden hand at his side, the other flexing unconsciously. "I had to," he said. "There's something we must discuss." She finally turned her head, and in her eyes, Jaime saw the reflection of madness. Once, they had shared in each other's ambition, balanced each other's darker tendencies with a sense of fierce loyalty. But now, Cersei's gaze seemed to harbor only anger and distrust. The last days had drained her, leaving a hollowness behind her usual cunning. "Let me guess," she said with a sneer. "You've come to lecture me. You've heard the rumors, no doubt. They gossip like flies about my plans to raise the rebellious strongholds, to break any who dare oppose us. You think I'm going too far?" He swallowed. "You've threatened to set wildfire to the city itself if they don't bend the knee." "The city, Cersei? You would burn innocents." "They're not innocents to me," she hissed, voice growing sharper. "They're all complicit. Every single one of them watched, cheered, or remained silent when the faith militant dragged me through the streets like a whore. And now, do you think they remain loyal? They're waiting for me to fail. They're waiting like vultures, sniffing for the first drop of blood. I won't let it happen. They will submit or they will die. That's how we stay on top. That's what it means to rule." Jaime closed his eyes, as though in pain. He could picture the future she envisioned. Fire raging in the streets, burning women and children alike, the city walls blackening under the green flames. Maybe in the darkest part of his heart he had known this would come. Maybe he'd seen it the first time she had whispered monstrous ideas into his ear. But he had clung to loyalty, to love, and now that loyalty demanded he act. "You would become the second Mad King," he said quietly, each word laden with heartbreak. "We fought so many wars, lost so many lives, only to destroy ourselves in the end?" She set her goblet on a table with a sharp clang. "You always were a hypocrite," she spat. "Don't pretend your hands are any cleaner. You killed Aerys and they named you Kingslayer. But you did that for the realm, didn't you? How's this any different? Power is all that matters. Fear keeps men in line. If you want to save them, Jaime, you must break them." He stepped forward, his breath coming quicker. "I killed Aerys to prevent him from destroying King's Landing. I'll not stand idly by while you repeat his madness. Let it go, Cersei. Step down. We'll find a way to Step down." She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think you can command me? You, who've stood by my side, protected me, indulged my every move, and now you dare come with threats." His hand clenched on the pommel of the sword hanging at his hip. He could almost feel the flicker of steel calling to him, much like it had when he stood behind the Mad King's throne and heard that dreaded order burn them all. Blood thundered in his ears. An entire realm's worth of lives weighed on his next decision, and he felt that old, haunting sense of inevitability coursing through his veins. "Don't do this," he said one last time, voice trembling. "Please." In those green eyes that mirrored his own, Jaime saw the final flicker of the woman he had once loved. Then her lips tightened and she reached for the dagger she kept at her waist. He saw the flash of steel, the shift in her stance. It was too late to stop what destiny demanded. The next moments played out like a nightmare. She lunged, and he sidestepped her blow, golden hand clumsy but effective in knocking the blade aside. He tried to grab her wrist, to wrest the dagger away, but she twisted fiercely, her face contorted in a snarl. A table crashed behind them as she reeled backwards, trying for another strike. Jaime's sword left its scabbard as if guided by another hand, all the weight of duty and fear behind it. He did not even remember drawing it, only hearing the ring of steel in that small, stifling room. Cersei advanced again, dagger slicing the air. He parried, shocked by her desperate fury. This was not a scuffle or a heated argument. This was a duel, savage and final. The dagger's tip grazed the golden hand and clanged uselessly off. Jaime pivoted, using the flat of his sword to knock her back. He shouted her name, but she was beyond hearing, face twisted with hatred. She lunged again, and he dodged, calling on every ounce of skill he possessed. Then, time slowed. She raised the dagger for one more thrust, straight at his heart, but Jaime angled his blade. The steel point sank beneath her ribs. A gasp escaped her lips, too quiet and too stunned to be a scream. Her eyes went wide as she looked down at the sword's bloody edge protruding from her body. She trembled, steps faltering. Jaime let go of the sword hilt in horror, his breathing ragged. He reached out, tried to catch her as she slumped forward. Her blood soaked through his hand. He drew her close, tears stinging his eyes. She still gripped the dagger, but her strength was fading, the blade slipping from her grasp. Her eyes fluttered up to meet his one last time, a flicker of betrayal mixing with agonized disbelief. Then her lips twitched in a bitter half-smile as though fate had played its final trick on them both. Valonqar, she whispered the prophecy's word. Her breath rattled and all tension left her body. The dagger clattered to the stone floor. Jaime sank to his knees, cradling her in his arms. He could still hear the beat of his own heart pounding like a drum of war, but hers was stilled. The woman he had loved more than anyone lay lifeless against him, blood pooling on the rug. Tears came hot and silent. He had done this. The realm demanded it. Reason demanded it. His conscience demanded it. But guilt burned into his mind, a brand that would scar him until his last breath. The golden hand, tacky with her blood, felt heavier than it ever had. Useless, cold, symbolic of all that he had become. He did not know how long he knelt there, the hush broken only by the crackle of a distant torch. At some point, the door to her chambers creaked open, and one of the Lannister guards, perhaps the same who'd stood watch outside, let out a muffled gasp. Jaime looked up, tears staining his cheeks. Unable to speak, he lifted Cersei in his arms, her head rolling lifelessly against his shoulder. The guard stumbled back, horror written across his face. Jaime rose unsteadily, carrying the queen's body toward the bed. He laid her down gently on the crimson covers, smoothing her hair as though she might still wake. For one last moment, he pressed his forehead to hers, murmuring a small, inaudible apology. When he turned to face the doorway, the guard was gone, likely running to spread the news. Jaime stiffened, expecting more footsteps, more outcries. He braced himself for the clamor, the condemnation, the outpouring of shock and fear. But for now, it was only silence, only the hush of a dreadful night. Slowly, he walked back to the corridor, sword still smeared with her blood at his side. Footsteps arrived at last. Frantic, echoing, a group of guards from various corners of the Red Keep. Shouts of confusion rose in the hall. Jaime stood in the open doorway, posture rigid, haunted eyes meeting theirs. The question swam in the air. Who had killed the queen? Jaime waited for them to seize him, to brand him a traitor. Yet they hesitated, confusion twisting their features. Some recognized him as the queen's brother, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard in all but name, the celebrated hero of various battles. The knowledge of what had just occurred lay too heavy to be processed in a single moment. Finally, one guard spoke. "My lord." What happened?" Jaime's voice came out rough. "She drew a blade on me. She threatened to burn the city. It was... I..." He could not form a coherent explanation. The words caught in his throat, and all the guards could see his blood-soaked clothing, the anguish etched on his face. A hush fell. The weight of this event, a Lannister slaying his own sister, the queen, was too monumental to grasp. Guards exchanged unsure looks. Many of them were sworn to House Lannister, loyal to the queen. Yet Jaime was the famed Kingslayer, a war hero, and by birth, next in line to rule the house now that Tywin, Kevin, and so many others were gone. The hush persisted, crackling with tension. Then one guard ventured a trembling question. What do we do now?" Jaime's face was pale, drained. "Secure the castle," he finally said. "Lock down the gates. No one in or out." He paused, swallowing the last remains of his sorrow, and fetched the small council. "We must address this at once." He took a step, and they parted before him, uncertain, frightened. He walked in a daze through the corridor, each stride carrying him deeper into the labyrinth of the Red Keep. Before the night was over, word would spread like wildfire through King's Landing and beyond. Queen Cersei Lannister, dead by her own brother's sword. Betrayal, prophecy, madness. People would spin their tales. The city's undercurrent of tension would explode into chaos. And at the heart of it all stood Jaime, who for the second time had taken the life of a ruler to spare the city from annihilation. The corridors blurred around him, lined with tapestries showing House Lannister's proud lion. A hush seemed to follow in his wake, as if the very walls knew the magnitude of what he had done. He emerged into the great hall, stepping between towering columns. Torchlight glimmered off the polished marble floor. Red banners hung from the rafters, bearing the golden lion crest. A row of vacant thrones loomed in the shadows, but the Iron Throne itself sat on a raised dais at the far end, barbed and imposing as ever. A pang of memory seized him. The first time he'd walked into this hall as a young man, arrogant, sure of his skill, wearing the white cloak of the King's Guard. Back then, the throne had been a symbol he guarded for another. Now it stood empty, a seat that demanded an occupant, a seat that had, in countless ways, destroyed the people closest to it. He looked away, unable to face the sight of that cruel mass of swords. The realm needed leadership now more than ever. With Cersei gone, the question of succession would ignite a fresh crisis. Already, the realm was fractured from wars and disputes over legitimacy. Wild rumors of Targaryen heirs had swirled, but in the power vacuum left behind, the lines of inheritance would be tested. The people might rise in revolt if they learned the queen's brother had killed her. Rivals might seize the moment to stake their claims. Jaime tried to steady himself. Duty pressed on him like a vice. All eyes would be on him, brother to the queen, once her beloved, the one who had ended her life. 1,000 swirling questions demanded answers, but all he could think about was the image of Cersei's dying gaze. Vengeance, heartbreak, or destiny? He did not know. A small cluster of courtiers, attendants, and lesser lords were beginning to gather at the edges of the great hall, drawn by the commotion. Gasps spread when they noticed his blood-smeared clothes. Whispers rose, urgent and trembling, as they realized something monumental had happened. Jaime ground his teeth, forcing himself not to shrink from their horrified stares. Let them look, let them whisper. What had to be done had been done. Summon the small council, Jaime commanded, voice echoing off the vast hall. Now! Scribes and attendants scattered to carry his orders. Jaime remained where he stood, sword at his side, feeling the cold press of regret creeping up his spine. He could almost see a specter in the corner of the hall. The memory of another dead king, of Aerys Targaryen, his body slumped near the base of the Iron Throne, and Jaime in his blood-spattered white cloak. Now he had repeated the story with his own sister. The realm might hail him as a hero or curse him as a monster, but he knew the truth was more complicated than any simple label. The great hall gradually filled with key figures of the realm, lords and ladies who had managed to survive the chaos of recent years, members of the crown's advisors, and the new breed of opportunists who hovered around power like moths to a flame. Their expressions ranged from shaken to furious, from shocked to intrigued. Among them was Qyburn's replacement as Master of Whisperers, a thin, sharp-eyed man named Lord Parman, who wore the sigil of House Westerling pinned to his cloak. The Master of Coin, Lady Culfield, hovered nearby, her plump face drained of color. A few others joined, forming a wide semicircle around Jaime, but he noticed the absence of many who had either fled the capital or been executed by Cersei's brutal purges in the weeks before. One of the older lords, Harren Massey, cleared his throat. "Sir Jaime," he began, voice shaking with poorly disguised alarm. "We've had disturbing news about the Queen." Jaime took a moment to gather his words, scanning their faces. Some had tears in their eyes. Others looked coldly calculating. "She's dead," Jaime said simply, each word carefully measured. The statement caused a ripple of gasps and uneasy murmurs. He steeled himself, remembering that no matter how carefully he chose his words, the effect would be explosive. Cersei threatened the city. She intended to burn it if her demands weren't met. In a confrontation, she attacked me. She left me no choice. That last phrase landed hollow in his own ears. No choice. Yet he knew that even if she hadn't lunged with a blade, the path was set. But for now, this half-truth would have to suffice. Lord Parman's thin face twisted. "You killed her? The rumors are true." He looked as though he could hardly believe what he was saying. Jaime gave a single nod. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. He felt their eyes on him, measuring him for any sign of weakness. "Sh. He was set on destroying the realm in her quest to keep power. I stopped her the only way I could. A flicker of old regret lit in his heart. He remembered saying nearly the same words to Eddard Stark after he'd slain Aerys all those years ago. Lady Culfield pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "We are undone," she whispered. "The city will riot. The houses that secretly despised her may celebrate, but oh, the chaos." Several voices broke out at once, and the great hall descended into confusion. Some wept, others shouted. A few demanded justice, others demanded immediate measures to secure the city's gates and the King's Road. Accusations flew that Jaime had orchestrated a coup for personal gain. A contingent of the Lannister Guard arrived, uncertain whom to obey. Jaime's gaze swept over the assembled lords, recalling that many had bowed to Cersei only out of fear. Now, these frightened men and women faced an uncertain future and an equally uncertain new power in the form of Jaime Lannister. He stepped forward, raising his voice with surprising authority. "Enough." Silence fell. They looked at him, stunned, as though seeing him in a new light. "We've known war too long. The realm is exhausted. I won't stand by and let us descend into anarchy. For now, the city is under my protection. The Red Keep remains in Lannister hands. If you value peace, if you value your lives, you'll do what you can to keep order. We have enough supplies in the city stores to prevent starvation if we distribute them properly." It was a bold statement, one that would be tested soon enough. But Jaime saw the flickers of relief, or at least acceptance, in some eyes. He was not stepping aside, nor was he proclaiming himself a usurper in that very moment. But the vacuum left by Cersei's death demanded a focal point. He was the only Lannister left in King's Landing with the authority to take the helm. A hush followed, then uncertain but urgent nods. Lord Massey gathered his nerve. "You speak of protecting the realm, Sir Jaime. But you must know that we'll need a king or queen if we are to avoid more bloodshed. The Iron Throne cannot remain empty." Jaime's stomach twisted at that thought. Of all the nightmares he'd entertained, sitting the Iron Throne himself had rarely been one. Once, out of naive arrogance, he might have dreamed of glory. But that was a younger man's conceit. The price of that seat was too high. Yet even as he hesitated, he felt the heavy gaze of the gathered lords and ladies, the unspoken truth that no one else in King's Landing currently had a strong enough claim or enough force to seize it without plunging them back into war. His thoughts churned with memories of the realm's miseries, waves of plague, lines of refugees, shattered alliances. Daenerys Targaryen had been rumored dead across the sea, or perhaps still alive. Jon Snow, the king in the north, had vanished into the far reaches of the realm after his own wars. The Baratheons were nearly extinct save for Gendry, whose parentage had been legitimized by royal decree some time ago, but who had no real power base beyond Storm's End. The Tyrells and Martells were gone or fractured beyond measure. The Iron Islands had their own struggles. In the capital, only a handful of war-weary lords remained. And so, as the hall waited, Jaime heard himself speak words he never thought he would. "I will take the throne, for now," he said. A hush followed as a final wave of shock coursed through the assembly. Not for ambition, he clarified, but because the realm cannot stand leaderless. Our enemies would tear us apart. "I will hold the throne until order is restored, and then the lords of the realm can convene to decide the best course forward." Part of him wondered if any among them believed that last line. Power, once seized, was rarely relinquished. But Jaime's own heart told him he had to try. He had come to see the Iron Throne as a curse, a seat that devoured souls. Yet if there was no one else... The whispers stirred like leaves in a storm. No one openly challenged him yet. The Lannister gold cloaks present had already taken positions at the base of the dais, protective stances that warned the lords not to push too far. Jaime felt his throat tighten, but he raised his chin. If fate demanded this of him, so be it. He turned and ascended the few steps to the Iron Throne, each footfall echoing in the hush. The sword at his side grew heavier with each step. When he reached the seat, a mass of twisted steel, hammered from the surrendered swords of defeated enemies, he paused. Scenes from his past flickered through his mind, the child he had pushed from a tower window in Winterfell, the father he had loathed, the siblings he had loved and lost. He could practically feel the ghosts of Aerys and Cersei swirling around him. Taking one last breath, Jaime Lannister sat on the Iron Throne. The hall erupted with noise, some gasps, some scattered applause, many mutters of disbelief. It felt like 1,000 knives jutted into his back, pressing against his armor. The seat was uncomfortable in every sense, but he remained there, hands steady on the armrests, one flesh, one gold. He let the noise wash over him, revealing for a moment the iron will that had once made him feared on the battlefield. At length, he raised his hand, calling for silence. The hush returned, and all eyes turned to the new occupant of the throne. He leaned forward, voice quiet but resonant. We will issue a proclamation. The city is under martial law until further notice. Any rebellion will be met with swift justice. But let us also offer mercy to those who keep the peace. Food will be rationed fairly. The crown will not tolerate abuses of power. We will keep the realm from falling into darkness." More nods, though guarded. He was no fool. He knew half the people in this room might be plotting his downfall by sunrise. But for now, they needed to cling to the idea that someone capable was at the helm. Jaime Lannister, Kingslayer, Queenslayer, had stepped into the role of savior or tyrant, depending on perspective. In the hours that followed, he gathered the city's officials and gave orders: the gates to be secured, the Red Keep garrison placed on high alert, ravens sent to major lords announcing Queen Cersei's demise and his ascension. He drafted statements of peace, disclaimers of tyranny, all while the city's rumor mill spun out of control. In the antechambers, lords bombarded him with questions about alliances, debts, the future of their houses. Jaime gave careful, measured responses, desperate not to spark further bloodshed. He found no reprieve, no time to mourn or reflect. The swirl of power had him in its grip. Late at night, exhausted and haunted, Jaime stood at a high balcony overlooking King's Landing. Fires dotted the darkness, torches lit in vigil or fear. A murmur rose from the streets, a blend of hush and panic, excitement and dread. He could sense the city was holding its breath, waiting to see if the new occupant of the throne would be kinder or crueler than the old. He rested his golden hand on the stone rail. The wind tugged at his cloak, and for a moment he remembered standing on these heights with Cersei, looking out over a city they had believed was theirs by right. A stab of grief lanced through him. He had not even been able to bury her properly yet. Her body remained in the Red Keep, prepared for a funeral that would be overshadowed by everything else. He wondered if, in that final moment, she had recognized his reasons, or if she had only felt betrayal. His mind slid back to the prophecy that had haunted her all her life. The Valonqar, the little brother, would wrap his hands around her pale white throat and choke the life from her. Maggie the Frog had never said that brother had to be Tyrion. Over the years, Cersei had fixated on Tyrion as the source of her doom, ignoring the idea that Jaime, the elder twin by mere moments, could also be the Valonqar. The prophecy had proven true in a twisted, literal sense. He had slain her, though not exactly as the prophecy described. The weight of prophecy was cold comfort. He heard a light tread behind him. Turning, he saw Brienne of Tarth entering the balcony, her face drawn with sorrow. She had arrived earlier that evening, having traveled from the last pocket of conflict in the Riverlands, bearing news of the strife there. She had heard rumors of chaos in King's Landing, but no one could have expected this. Now she approached him, posture awkward yet resolute. "Jaime," she said quietly, always calling him by name rather than title. She took in his weary form, the bloodstains still on his tunic. "Is it true? You killed her?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. Her eyes flickered with compassion, though her stance remained firm. She had never hidden her disapproval of Cersei's methods, yet Jaime knew how complicated their dynamic was. She stepped to his side, glancing at the city lights below. "You should sleep," she said, no accusation in her voice, only gentle concern. "You look as though you fought 10 battles in one day." He let out a bitter laugh. "That's how it feels." "Sleep, though? When the realm is on the brink of falling apart." She rested a hand on the parapet, inches from his own. "I've seen how people look to you now. They want a leader to keep the peace. Don't let them down." Was that faith in her voice? Jaime allowed himself a small, mirthless smile. "I'm not sure I'm fit for this, Brienne. I'm not the golden knight people once believed me to be." She studied him for a moment, her blue eyes penetrating. "You're not the same man you were," she finally said. "But that might be for the best. I've seen your courage, your honor, however battered it may be. If you truly wish to protect the realm, perhaps you are the right man for the throne, at least for now." A pause. "But be mindful of the cost." He turned back to the city, a tightness forming in his chest. The cost. The cost was everything: his sister, his illusions, any shred of innocence he had left. "I will," he murmured. After a tense silence, he added, "Thank you, Brienne." She nodded and took her leave. Jaime remained, the hush of the night enveloping him. Exhaustion finally overwhelmed him, and he made his way back into the Red Keep, retiring to chambers that had once belonged to his father, then to Tommen, and then to no one, as the palace had shifted in usage. He slid out of his bloody clothes and sank onto the large bed. Sleep came fitfully, filled with nightmares of green fire, of Cersei's dying stare, of swords forging themselves around him like prison bars. At dawn, he was roused by his attendants. Suddenly, he had attendants to prepare him for the day. Word had spread throughout the city that there would be an address from the new king. Outside, the streets were stirring with anxious energy. Some had come out of curiosity, some out of hope, some out of fear. Jaime donned armor that shimmered with gilded plates, but he felt no pride as it was strapped onto him. He felt only the burden. He stood at the top of the grand steps outside the Red Keep, looking down on a gathering crowd. Flanked by Lannister guards and a handful of knights from lesser houses, Jaime raised a hand for silence. The massive faces stared up at him, a ripple of murmurs passing through them. Perhaps they expected a declaration of martial tyranny or retribution for any who had supported the Queen's enemies. His voice rang out, cutting across the courtyard. "People of King's Landing, I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as a man who has seen enough death. Queen Cersei is gone. I will not lie to you, I ended her reign. She wished to unleash a terror upon the city that would have destroyed you all. I stopped her as once I stopped the Mad King before her." He braced himself for boos, jeers, or curses. Some among the crowd wept quietly, others remained stone-faced, while a few scattered souls dared to cheer. Most just listened with numb shock, like a city too battered to react with a single voice. Jaime pressed on. "I take the throne in this time of crisis. But my first decree is this: the city is under my protection. The City Watch will ensure fair distribution of food and water. Any found hoarding or abusing their position will be punished. I will not repeat the mistakes of past kings. I will not set this city ablaze, but I demand order in return. We cannot survive if we tear each other apart. Stay calm. Your children need a future." A wave of uncertain murmurs followed. Jaime scanned the crowd, seeing a mosaic of faces. Some looked malnourished, vestiges of the famine that had crept through the realm. Others bore the scars of war. In that moment, Jaime felt a stirring of something he had rarely allowed himself to feel: compassion. He had always been a soldier or a lover, seldom a ruler. Could he do this? Could he be the king that the realm needed? Or was he merely prolonging its suffering with one more Lannister's ambition? He concluded his speech with quiet resolve. "I will do what must be done to preserve the city and the realm beyond. Judge me by my deeds. Carry on with your lives and know you do not face the threat of wildfire under my reign." He turned away, letting the crowd's reaction swirl behind him. The hustle of the courtyard resumed. As he stepped back into the Red Keep, he could feel the watchful eyes of the realm upon him. He braced himself for the flood of urgent matters. And indeed, the next days were a maelstrom of letters, couriers, judgments. Minor houses scrambled to swear fealty or renounce him. Rivals conspired. Friends offered cautious support. Jaime tried to navigate this labyrinth with advice from the small council, what was left of it. Brienne occasionally provided a voice of reason, though she was no politician. Lord Parman and Lady Culfield each had their agendas. Raven after raven arrived with news of brewing unrest in the Crownlands, the Stormlands, and beyond. Weeks passed, and Jaime began to grasp the precariousness of his reign. Rumors of a Targaryen loyalist uprising surfaced in the Riverlands, led by minor lords who claimed they had a hidden Targaryen heir. The North remained aloof, dealing with its own challenges in the bitter cold. The Vale watched from behind the Aerys' high walls, uncertain whom to support. The men of the Iron Islands looked to their own gain. Meanwhile, inside King's Landing, the common folk breathed with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Cersei's brutal regime was ended, and the new king had not begun mass executions or unleashed wildfire. Yet the city had learned to distrust any occupant of the Iron Throne. Jaime rose early each morning, holding council meetings in the Tower of the Hand. Though he was king now, the old name stuck. He had not yet appointed a new hand, partly because he feared giving that power to the wrong person. Instead, he sat at a massive oak table, golden hand resting awkwardly on the tabletop, while a handful of lords and advisors argued about how to feed the populace, how to strengthen the city watch, how to respond to letters from rebellious lords. As the days wore on, he felt his skill at command growing. He might never be the cunning mastermind that Tywin Lannister was, but the knights and the guards respected him as a warrior, and more importantly, as someone who had decided to prioritize the realm over personal vendettas. In quieter moments, he found himself visiting the Godswood. King's Landing's Godswood was smaller than those of the north, but it offered a sliver of tranquility. A single heart tree stood there, though it lacked the carved face found in northern weirwoods. Jaime sat by its trunk sometimes, lost in thought. He remembered the nights of laughter with Tyrion, the bond he'd once shared with his younger brother. Tyrion was out there somewhere, if he still lived, no longer a fugitive, but neither an ally to Cersei's cause. Part of Jaime longed to find him, to explain how everything had ended with Cersei's downfall, to ask for his counsel in these uncertain times. Yet the search for Tyrion had yielded only dead ends. Rumors placed him across the narrow sea, or in Dorne, or with secret allies in Pentos. Jaime toyed with the idea of sending more men to find him, but the realm's business demanded every resource at hand. As spring approached, a small measure of peace settled over King's Landing, but tension remained. Jaime's proclamations about rationing and fair trade won him a measure of grudging acceptance from the common folk. He'd reduced the tax burdens on small merchants, curtailed abuses by gold cloaks, and tried to handle disputes among the noble houses with a firm but even hand. Whispers of Kingslayer and Queenslayer still circulated, but so did the rumor that this Lannister might not be as cruel as some that came before. Still, the city remembered that fire had loomed once, and might loom again if the new king's will was challenged too harshly. One crisp morning, a rider arrived from the Stormlands with an urgent letter. The new Lord Baratheon Gendry had set aside the blacksmith's hammer in favor of a lord's responsibilities. He wrote that a gathering of lords in the Stormlands was concerned about King Jaime's legitimacy, uncertain if they should pledge fealty without a coronation recognized by the High Septon. The faith, battered under Cersei's rule, had yet to name a new High Septon, leaving a void in religious authority. Jaime's crowning had been a rushed, secular affair. He realized that to stabilize his rule, he would need the blessing of the faith or risk further rebellions. And so, after weeks of delicate negotiation, Jaime arranged a grand coronation ceremony to be held in the Great September of Baelor, rebuilt after the destruction it had suffered in the wars and Cersei's own atrocities. The scaffolding had just come down, leaving a refurbished dome of stained glass and polished marble floors. The new High Septon, hastily elected by a small conclave of surviving Septons, arrived from Old Town with trembling anxiety. No one knew if this coronation would be peaceful or disrupted by bombs of wildfire or an angry mob. On the morning of the coronation, Jaime dressed in regal attire that felt foreign to him. Fine crimson silk, a cloak embroidered with golden lions, a polished breastplate. His golden hand had been cleaned and buffed until it shone. He gazed at himself in a mirror, feeling a stab of irony. Here stood Jaime Lannister, famed for arrogance and skill at arms, an oathbreaker in the eyes of many, now to be consecrated as king of the Seven Kingdoms. He wondered if the gods were mocking him. Brienne, standing by to accompany him, broke the silence. "You look ready," she said simply. Behind her stood a handful of Kingsguard knights that Jaime had personally selected, men who had proven their loyalty to the realm, not just to Lannister gold. The white cloaks of the Kingsguard symbolized a purer ideal than Jaime felt worthy of, but he wanted them near. Familiar faces, stable presences in an unstable world. He inhaled, steadying his nerves. Then let's not keep the seven waiting. The procession to the Great September was short but fraught. Gold cloaks lined the streets. Crowds gathered, some hurling jeers, Kingslayer, others more curious or hopeful. Jaime rode a splendid white stallion, golden hand resting on the reins, while 6 Kingsguard knights flanked him. The rest of the retinue included various lords of the Crownlands, the Riverlands, and a representative from the Stormlands. House Tyrell was gone, House Martell likewise, and the Vale had sent only a minor lord to observe. It was a stark reminder of how many great houses had fallen or been shattered by war. Arriving at the Grand Plaza before the September, Jaime dismounted. White marble steps gleamed under the sun. At the top waited the newly appointed High Septon, an older man with a kindly if wary expression. People filled the plaza, subdued but pressing forward to witness the ceremony. Jaime ascended the steps, the hush thickening like mist. When he entered the September, its stained glass windows poured colored light across the polished floors. Rows of onlookers parted to let him approach the altar. He could feel the weight of 1,000 gazes on his back. The High Septon began to speak in reverent tones, invoking the seven: father, mother, warrior, smith, maiden, crone, stranger. Jaime listened, an odd calm settling over him. He remembered kneeling before the High Septon in younger days, swearing the Kingsguard oath. How far he had come since then, how much had changed. He'd broken oaths, lost his hand, lost his family. The stranger's domain felt more tangible than ever, a presence lurking in the corner of his mind. "And do you swear," intoned the High Septon, "to uphold the laws of the realm, to protect the innocent, to serve the good of the people, and to rule justly under the guidance of the seven?" Jaime swallowed. His voice resonated in the silence. "I swear it." The High Septon gestured, and a circlet of hammered gold was presented, a new crown. Jaime had commissioned it to be simple, unadorned except for the sigil of House Lannister, though less ostentatious than Cersei's had been. The older man raised it high, then placed it on Jaime's head. A hush followed, thick with tension. I proclaimed Jaime of House Lannister as King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, said the High Septon. A pause. May the Seven guide him. The moment felt surreal. Jaime stood, the crown's weight pressing on his brow. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then building. Outside the September trumpets blared. The ceremony concluded without incident. Jaime managed to bow respectfully to the High Septon before turning to face the congregation. He offered a short prayer and a promise to heal the realm, then slowly made his way outside. The midday sun struck the crown, making it glint like a beacon. Days passed and King Jaime's rule took on a more official shape. Treaties and pacts were drawn, forging fragile alliances. Some lords wrote to pledge fealty, others to test his resolve. A few houses threatened open rebellion if certain demands were not met, like House Hightower in the Reach, which had begun consolidating what remained of Tyrell loyalists. Jaime dispatched envoys, urging negotiation over war. He had no appetite for more bloodshed, the realm was still too fragile. Despite these efforts, the rumor of a Targaryen heir in the Riverlands grew. Whispers claimed a young woman rumored to be a Blackfyre descendant had raised a banner, rallying peasants and some disaffected knights. Others claimed it was some distant offshoot of House Targaryen who had barely escaped the sack of King's Landing decades ago. The details were murky, but the movement, known as the Dragon's Rebirth, was no mere rumor now. Skirmishes erupted around Harrenhal and the Trident. Peasant mobs joined the would-be Targaryen pretender, hoping for better fortunes under a dragon banner than under a Lannister lion. Faced with this growing threat, Jaime was forced to raise an army. He found himself seated in the Tower of the Hand once more, with advisors and generals circled around a map. Small pins depicted loyal forces near King's Landing, while scattered pins along the Riverlands indicated enemy or unknown loyalties. The countryside was not exactly brimming with resources. Years of war had taken their toll. And while Jaime still commanded the gold of Casterly Rock, the Lannister coffers were not infinite. If you march on them too soon, warned Lord Parman, you risk walking into a quagmire. We don't know if the Targaryen pretender has any real claim or if she might have allies we haven't accounted for. We can't wait either, said Brienne, standing tall in her armor. The longer they build support, the more likely it is we'll face a larger conflict. Jaime rubbed his temples, feeling the tension throbbing behind his eyes. We'll send a royal decree, offering amnesty to any lords who abandon this pretender. If that fails, we'll march. But by the 7, let us avoid a full-scale war. Weeks later, in a corner of the Riverlands near the ruins of once prosperous fields, Jaime led a host of 2,000 men. Banners snapping in the wind, the Lannister lion crest accompanied by the royal sigil that he had adapted. His house lion flanked by a golden sword. A smaller contingent under Brienne's command scouted ahead. The roads were quiet, villages nearly deserted. Eventually, they reached a makeshift camp of the so-called Dragon's Rebirth. Tents dotted a field near a battered watchtower, lacking in discipline but brimming with desperate volunteers. Jaime sent riders with white flags to parley. He watched them approach, heart pounding. This was his first major test as king. Would he be able to avoid more bloodshed? Or would it end in yet another battle, leaving more corpses to rot in the fields? After some tense negotiation, a group of rebels emerged to meet Jaime in a clearing. At their forefront stood a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with silver blonde hair. She wore simple leather, no crown, but on her tunic was an emblem of a 3-headed dragon in black. Though her face lacked the regal bearing of Daenerys Targaryen, her eyes flashed with a certain defiance. "I am Alice Waters," she declared, voice trembling slightly but growing stronger as she spoke. "They call me Targaryen, for my grandsire's blood. I mean to claim what is rightfully mine." Her accent betrayed a Riverlands upbringing. "I offer peace if you will step down from the throne and let the rightful bloodline rule." Jaime studied her, seeing youth and desperation. "And if I refuse?" She tensed. "Then we'll fight. We may be fewer, but the people's hearts are with us. They've suffered under your house, under the Lannisters and the Baratheons before you. Now you claim the throne after murdering your sister, who was queen. Why should anyone trust you? Jaime exhaled. The line stung even if it was true. Because I will not burn them with wildfire or unleash war after war. I've worked to rebuild King's Landing. I've tried to feed its people. I will not claim to be a saint, but I want peace. Can you say the same? Her jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, Jaime saw doubt in her eyes. Then anger kindled. Peace under your rule, you mean? What of the rightful Targaryen heritage stolen by your ancestors when Robert Baratheon seized the throne? Jaime had no easy answer. That was decades ago, he said quietly. Your cause might be just or might not. But if you spark another war now, countless innocents will die. Is that what you want your reign to begin with? A crowd of rebel peasants gathered behind her, armed with crude spears and scavenged swords. Some war rags, others old Lannister armor pieces likely looted from dead soldiers. They looked at Jaime with hatred, suspicion, or desperation. He could sense the tension teetering on a knife's edge. Alice Waters's voice trembled with emotion. Better to die fighting for a rightful claim than to bow to usurpers forever. Jaime felt a pang. He remembered the countless times he had fought for reasons he barely understood, fighting for the name Lannister, for Cersei's desire. He remembered the innocent blood spilled, the screams. Alice, he said, breaking formalities, I don't believe you're a monster. If you truly have Targaryen blood, then perhaps you have your own claim. But is it worth the cost now? The realm has seen too many wars. My oath is to keep the peace. If I must fight, I will, but I'd rather avoid it. Surrender, and I'll grant you a pardon. I'll even consider a council to examine your claim. She froze, tears threatening her composure. A council made up of your men, no doubt. Not just mine, Jaime countered, a note of desperation creeping in. Gather the lords, let them decide. But don't throw away innocent lives for a chance at a throne built on bones. For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. Then, behind her, an older knight with a scarred face muttered, words, empty words from a Lannister. Others murmured their agreement, brandishing spears. The tension mounted. Alice Waters clenched her fists. This is bigger than me. These people want an end to Lannister rule. Jaime's men, equally nervous, began to shift. Crossbows were lifted, swords unsheathed. Brienne stood behind Jaime, hand on her hilt, caution in her stance. The next moment might spark a battle or peace. Jaime felt his heart pounding, a sense of tragic inevitability. Would he have to kill this young woman, too, in the name of preventing more death? The question gnawed at him, as sharp as any blade. Alice, he tried one last time, voice urgent. Don't do this. But the older knight behind her roared, we will not yield to the Kingslayer, and hurled a spear. Jaime barely had time to react. The spear sailed wide of him, but it struck one of Jaime's soldiers, who fell with a grunt. The lines rippled, chaotic shouts erupting. Arrows flew. The rebel peasants surged forward, and Jaime's knights braced their shields. In an instant, the parley shattered into skirmish. Swallowing his dismay, Jaime drew his sword. Shields up, he shouted. Hold! He was determined not to let his men slaughter these peasants. But survival was now the immediate concern. The clang of steel on steel rang out as the rebels charged. Many of them fell quickly, lacking proper armor or training, but their desperation fueled them. Alice Waters darted through the melee, brandishing a sword with surprising skill. She aimed for Jaime, forcing him to parry. He deflected her blow, the shock reverberating through his arms. She was untrained, but her rage gave her strength. Jaime tried not to harm her, hoping to disarm. Stop this! Call them off, he shouted. She responded with a flurry of strikes, half-blinded by tears and fury. He blocked them, noticing how raw her technique was. Perhaps she had been trained by an old knight for a few months. In a lull, he stepped forward, hooking her blade with his own. In a single twist, he wrenched it from her grasp. She stumbled, breath coming fast, eyes wild with fear and anger. Before she could recover, Jaime dropped his sword tipped to the ground, refusing to deliver a final blow. Yield, he urged again. Don't throw your life away. A moment passed as chaos raged around them, shouts, screams, metal clashing. Alice panted, looking around at her followers falling. Blood darkened the ground, hope draining from her face. At last, she squeezed her eyes shut and sank to her knees, tears carving muddy tracks on her cheeks. Enough, she whispered. Jaime waved his hand, signaling his men to hold their advance. The rebel lines broke, fleeing or surrendering. The fight was short, brutal, and clearly one-sided. Jaime surveyed the carnage with a heavy heart. So many peasants lay wounded or dead, people who had pinned their dreams of a better life on a rumored Targaryen claim. Among Jaime's own men, a few had fallen as well, some mortally wounded. This was peace, he thought bitterly. Or what passes for it in Westeros? He knelt beside Alice Waters, handing her back her sword hilt first. She stared at it, not understanding. I yield, she managed. What will you do with me? Jaime's voice was soft. I'll take you to King's Landing as my guest, not my prisoner. We'll see if there is any merit to your claim. If the lords of the realm recognize you, I won't stop them from choosing you. But you need to halt this rebellion now. Tell your remaining followers to stand down. She nodded numbly, tears spilling. The older knight who'd begun the fight lay among the wounded, cursing. The rest of the rebel band was in disarray, too broken to continue. Jaime's men began the grim work of collecting bodies, tending to the injured. Brienne approached, relief in her eyes that the fighting had ended quickly. That evening, by the smoldering embers of campfires, Jaime oversaw the distribution of food and water to the captured rebels. He insisted they be fed, not starved or mistreated, though some among his own ranks grumbled that these traitors deserved a harsher fate. Jaime ignored them. His dream, maybe a foolish one, was to break the cycle of cruelty that had defined the realm's leaders for too long. He knew some men would call him weak for it, but he no longer cared for pride. The kindness was weakness, so be it. He found Alice sitting apart, staring at the ground, a blanket draped around her shoulders. She barely glanced up when he approached, but she did not resist as he sat next to her. The glow of the campfire illuminated the dried tear tracks on her cheeks. They told me you were called the Kingslayer, that you murdered your own queen and sat on the throne, she said quietly. I never dreamed you'd spare me. Jaime gazed at the flames. I don't want to be the monster the realm believes I am. I killed Queen Cersei because she was about to do something unforgivable. I won't pretend I haven't committed sins, but I want to do better now. She glanced at him sidelong, clearly torn. My mother always said I had Targaryen blood in my veins, that we were robbed of our inheritance. I thought that meant I had a duty to claim the throne, to right old wrongs. And maybe you do, Jaime admitted, but you won't do it by leading peasants to slaughter. He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling into the night. There must be another way, or we'll all burn together. Silence stretched between them. At length, she nodded, exhaustion washing over her. I'll stand down. I'll tell my people to stand down. I'm tired of this. I never wanted it to end in blood. Jaime allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief. He motioned to a guard, instructing him to bring water and bread for her. Then he stood, gazing at the night sky. Another day, another threat averted, but not without a cost in lives. He felt a deep weariness in his bones, a sense that no matter how hard he tried, Westeros would remain restless, battered by old grudges and new pretenders. But there, in that field of half-burned grass and battered tents, Jaime Lannister made a silent vow to persevere. He would do what he could to hold the realm together, to shield it from the madness that had consumed kings and queens before him. Maybe the realm would never forgive him for slaying Cersei. Maybe the memory of his sins would haunt him until the stranger claimed him. Still, he would not abandon the chance to guide Westeros toward a fragile peace. Perhaps that was the only redemption left to him, a final service to the living, a final rejection of the darkness that had taken root in the heart of the woman he once loved. Come dawn, he led the subdued rebel host back toward King's Landing. Alice Waters rode with him, silent, eyes full of uncertainty. The road stretched before them, dust swirling under the hooves of tired horses. Overhead, the sky was streaked with the pinks and oranges of early morning, a faint promise that another day had come, no matter how scarred the land and its people might be. When they reached the capital, the gates opened reluctantly. People stared, whispering. Word had traveled ahead that the rebellion in the Riverlands had been crushed. Some still looked at Jaime with awe or resentment, but none dared challenge him openly. Inside the Red Keep, he issued orders to feed the captured rebels, assign them tasks rebuilding the city. He arranged for Alice Waters to be housed in modest but comfortable quarters under watch while plans for a royal council to examine her claim took shape. Time rolled on, marked by each challenge Jaime faced on the throne. Skirmishes in the west, bandits in the south, uncertain alliances in the north. Yet each day he focused on stability rather than conquest, forging trade agreements, sending relief caravans to starving villages, re-establishing tolls and roads. If the realm had grown used to fear, he wanted to at least give them a glimmer of hope. Men still called him Kingslayer, but in cautious tones they also called him something new, King Jaime, the man who'd killed the queen but spared a pretender. Some considered him foolishly merciful. Others saw in that mercy a flicker of true leadership. In a quiet ceremony, he finally gave Cersei a proper funeral. The hall where her bier was placed was lined with Lannister banners. Her body rested in a marble sarcophagus carved with the lion of her house. Only a few attended, Jaime, the remaining members of the small council, and a handful of guards. The city's common folk did not weep for her. The bells tolled, but it was not a grand affair. Jaime stood there a long while, his head bowed, remembering the woman who had once been everything to him. He could almost smell the lilac in her hair, hear her mocking laughter. If things had been different, but they were not. He turned away with tears unshed. As the months trickled on, a precarious peace settled. The Targaryen pretender remained under close observation. Some in the small council advised executing her to remove any threat. Jaime refused, prompting quiet disputes. Lord Parman argued that her mere existence gave shape to future rebellions. But Jaime held firm. He would not murder a young woman who had already yielded, not unless she betrayed him again. Instead, he allowed her a seat at the table when the lords finally convened to assess her claim. That meeting dragged on for weeks, with maesters poring over genealogies, old letters, half-baked histories. Ultimately, it concluded that her claim was tenuous at best, though not entirely unfounded. In the end, the council offered her a choice: renounce her pursuit of the Iron Throne and be granted a small keep, or persist in her claim and face trial. Alice, exhausted, chose to accept the keep. Jaime saw the weariness in her eyes, the sorrow of lost dreams. He prayed she would find some semblance of peace. So it went, season by season. Swords were sheathed more often than drawn. The city's population slowly returned, shops reopened, blacksmiths hammered steel for plows as well as swords. Jaime's rule was not without its critics. Some lords chafed under new taxes, some knights disliked his attitude toward mercy. Yet, ironically, the realm began to mend under the hand of the man once called Oathbreaker. He had killed the queen who threatened to tear it apart. He had spilled blood where necessary, but not in wanton cruelty. Gradually, the name Kingslayer took on a different tone, one of caution, perhaps even a grudging respect. One dawn, in a small council session, Brienne stood beside Jaime. She had served as a trusted advisor, a voice of honor. He was discussing an initiative to send grain to the Stormlands when she quietly placed a hand on his arm. "Look," she said, gesturing to the window. Jaime turned to see the sunrise over King's Landing, the spires and domes bathed in golden light, the harbor shimmering. For once, the streets below did not echo with riots or screams. The bells tolled softly, not in mourning, but as a morning call to prayer. Seagulls wheeled overhead. He felt a pang in his chest. This was not perfection. He doubted Westeros would ever know peace without tension. But it was a step towards something better. And if he, Jaime Lannister, the man who had once thrown a boy from a tower, could guide the realm away from oblivion, perhaps redemption was not just a fool's hope. He turned back to Brienne, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's beautiful," he admitted. She studied him, a complicated blend of admiration and concern in her eyes. "A year ago, I would have never believed you'd sit that throne, nor that you'd spare rebels and uphold peace. The realm needed you, it seems." He nodded, a distant look in his eyes. "I only hope I can remain worthy of it." Then he squared his shoulders, returning to the business at hand. Duty continued, and so did he. In the following months, ravens arrived bearing news of smaller uprisings quelled by reasoned diplomacy rather than the sword. Reports of the North spoke of a fragile independence movement, but negotiations with Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell, were cordial and open to compromise. The Iron Islands grumbled, but their raids lessened as trade deals were struck. One by one, the flames of war flickered and dimmed, not gone entirely, but held at bay by patience and diligence. Jaime found himself spending the late hours in the royal library, reading old histories, treaties, anything that might help him govern more effectively. One evening, he came across a dusty tome about Aegon the Conqueror's earliest days. He read about the forging of the Iron Throne, how Aegon had wanted it to be uncomfortable to remind a ruler that they must never rest easy. Jaime closed the book and stared at the flickering candlelight. The message was clear: to rule was to bear a heavy burden. Comfort was not part of the bargain. He left the library and wandered the silent corridors of the Red Keep, eventually entering the throne room. Moonlight poured through high windows, bathing the barbed seat in an ethereal glow. Jaime approached, letting his hand trace the ancient steel edges. He remembered the first day he had claimed it, the swirl of shock, the glimmer of the past echoing in his mind. He lowered himself into the seat, feeling the press of cold metal. In the hush of the night, he allowed himself a single moment of reflection. He thought of Cersei, her fierce eyes, her cunning smile, her final madness. He thought of Tyrion, the brother he might never see again, the only other Lannister who might have understood the complexities of guilt and love. He thought of Brienne, standing by him despite everything, guiding him toward the knightly ideals he had once lost. He thought of the realm, torn, battered, yet somehow still standing, still yearning for a future free of tyranny. Sitting there, Jaime Lannister, Kingslayer, Queenslayer, now king, closed his eyes. He no longer wore the white cloak of a Kingsguard, but he felt the old ideals stir in his heart. Protect the weak, defend the realm, do what is necessary, even if it scars you. Perhaps redemption was a fragile dream, but if he could keep the realm from tearing itself apart, if he could spare children from the horrors he'd seen, then maybe he could face himself in the mirror. Maybe he could believe he was more than the sum of his sins. No clarion call rang out. No applause. Only the gentle sound of his own heartbeat echoing in the still chamber. In that moment, he embraced the solitude of the throne, the knowledge that to rule was to stand alone in the final reckoning. By killing Cersei, he had saved the city from wildfire, but the guilt and sorrow would never fully leave him. The price of peace was always blood, one way or another. Yet for the sake of the living, for the sake of a realm that had known too many tyrants, he would bear it. When he opened his eyes, he saw the faint outline of dawn lightening the horizon through the tall windows. Another day's work lay ahead: petitions, trade negotiations, judgments. 1,000 small decisions that would shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Jaime rose from the throne, the metal scraping softly. He rested his golden hand on its arm one last time before stepping away. Passing through the tall doors, he exited into the corridor with measured steps. Dawn was coming, and a king's duty was never done. He thought of the realm that stirred outside these walls, a realm he had sworn to protect, however broken his oaths had been in the past. If the realm was to stand, it needed a ruler who understood both the horror of war and the necessity of justice. He could be that ruler, or at least he would strive to be, for however many days fate allowed him on that cursed, revered Iron Throne. And so began the reign of Jaime Lannister, who had killed one king and one queen in the name of saving the realm, and who now shouldered the weight of the Iron Crown. It was a reign marked by sorrow and determination, mercy and occasional ruthlessness, haunted by ghosts yet guided by a desire to mend what could be mended. His story would be told for generations as bards argued whether he was a hero or another usurper. But to Jaime, labels no longer mattered. Only the realm did. And he would spend the rest of his days trying to justify that last, desperate act of love and betrayal, forging a fragile peace in the ashes of war. King Jaime had begun to settle into the relentless, unglamorous routine of ruling. Dawn brought council meetings, midday brought letters from across the Seven Kingdoms, evening brought audiences with petitioners. Occasionally, a feast or ceremony punctuated the days, but more often than not, the small council room was his kingdom within a kingdom where he grappled with problems both mundane and grave. The realm was wounded, her fields scorched by war, her towns battered by the chaos of years past. But as the months passed, the folk of King's Landing could see small signs of healing. Fewer beggars lay huddled outside the city gates, more street vendors returned to ply their wares, the Red Keep's guards, while vigilant, no longer terrorized the populace at every corner. It wasn't paradise, but by Westerosi standards, it was a season of calm. Jaime found it both heartening and exhausting. He was not made for prolonged bureaucracy, yet he shouldered the burden, determined to hold the fragile peace. And in those moments when he felt his energy wane, he reminded himself why he had killed Cersei, why he had seized the throne, to save the city from her madness, to spare the realm from another tyrant's cruelty. If he allowed matters to devolve again, then it would all have been in vain. Late one evening, he concluded a small council meeting in the Tower of the Hand. Candles burned low on the table, their light flickering across parchment laden with sums of coin, inventories of grain, names of suspected plotters. Lord Parman, Master of Whisperers, was speaking in his thin, incisive voice about a faint rumor of pirates striking at the western coast when Jaime held up a hand. "That will be enough for tonight," Jaime said. "I'll have your final recommendation in the morning." Parman, though disappointed not to discuss it further, inclined his head obediently. Lady Caulfield, the master of coin, hurried to gather her scrolls, her plump face revealing obvious fatigue. Brienne, standing behind Jaime's chair, shifted her weight as though she, too, felt the weight of the hour pressing on her. The lords and ladies filed out, exchanging hushed farewells. Eventually, only Jaime and Brienne remained in the lofty chamber, the heavy door shutting behind the last of the advisors with a dull thud. "You look exhausted," Brienne said quietly, breaking the hush. "You hardly touched your supper." Jaime rubbed his temple, the golden hand resting on the table. Even now, he often forgot how heavy it felt after a long day. "No appetite," he murmured. "I've had enough of logistics, rebellious mutterings, and minted coin to last me a lifetime." She stepped closer, concern in her eyes. "Then rest. The city will not topple if you steal a few hours of sleep." He lifted his gaze to hers. There was a warmth between them now, a bond of trust that had grown from their shared trials. He respected her judgment more than any other on his council. "I will," he said. "But first, I'd like to walk the battlements. Clear my head." Brienne hesitated, but she nodded. "I'll accompany you." They left the Tower of the Hand and made their way up winding staircases lit by guttering torches. When they reached the upper ramparts of the Red Keep, the wind greeted them with a briny chill sweeping up from Blackwater Bay. Stars glittered overhead and the moon cast pale light across King's Landing. The city below was quiet, or at least quieter than it once had been. Now that bread was more plentiful and taxes somewhat reduced, the small folk had less reason to riot. The watchtowers along the walls were manned by gold cloaks who saluted as the king passed. Jaime rested his forearms on the worn stone parapet, gold hand glinting in the moonlight. He felt Brienne's presence beside him, a steady reassurance. He gazed out over the sprawl of rooftops, torchlit windows, and narrow streets. Somewhere out there, people were living, loving, plotting, scraping together a life in the aftermath of war. "In many ways, the city is at peace," he said at length. "But I can sense the undercurrents. Bitterness doesn't vanish overnight. I fear it will take a generation for wounds to truly heal." She exhaled softly. "That's the nature of these lands. The grudges, the memories, they linger. Yet you've done more to hold it together than any of us expected." He gave a wry smile. "You sound surprised, Brienne." "I was," she admitted. "But not anymore. You've changed." Jaime closed his eyes briefly, letting the wind ruffle his hair. Change? Once, the notion had terrified him. He had clung to being the golden boy of House Lannister, a Kingsguard knight who lived for glory and family and little else. But that man had died somewhere between the forging of his golden hand and the moment he ran Cersei through. He opened his eyes, looking at her. "Thank you for standing by me. I don't say it enough." She inclined her head. "I do what I believe is right." A rare trait, Jaime said, a note of admiration in his voice. They lingered in companionable silence. After a while, they heard footsteps on the stone steps behind them. A young Lannister guard, his name was Tyon, if Jaime recalled correctly, approached, hesitant. "Your Grace," the guard said, breath puffing in the chill. "There's a messenger at the gate, demanding to see you at once. She carries an urgent letter." Jaime glanced at Brienne, then back to the guard. "Who is she?" "She wouldn't give her name outright, Your Grace, but she's dressed like a rider from the Vale. She says it's a matter of life and death." Jaime stood straight, frowning. "Escort her to the outer courtyard. I'll meet her there." The guard bowed and hurried off. Jaime, mind-buzzing, exchanged a look with Brienne. "The Vale? I wonder if this has to do with Lord Royce or young Lord Robert. Or perhaps Lady Sansa's negotiations for northern independence. Let's see." They made their way down the stairs and across the courtyard. Torches burned in iron brackets, casting flickering shadows on the cobblestones. The messenger waited, a slight woman in leathers bearing a falcon sigil. Her face was streaked with dust, and she looked chilled from a hard ride. She bowed quickly. "Your Grace, I came from the Bloody Gate with all haste." Jaime nodded, gesturing for her to speak. "You have a message from the Vale, I take it?" "Aye," she said, producing a sealed scroll. "From Lord Yohn Royce. He bid me place it in your hand alone." Jaime accepted the scroll. Its wax seal featured the runic falcon of House Royce. He broke the seal carefully and unrolled the parchment, stepping closer to a torch for light. Brienne stood at his shoulder, scanning the messenger with watchful curiosity. The message was brief, written in a heavy, deliberate hand. "Your Grace, I fear we have had an unwelcome development in the Vale. A retainer of Lord Baelish, long thought missing, has reappeared in the Eyrie, claiming dire knowledge of plots against the crown. He names conspirators among the Lords Declarant, though I cannot verify his claims. What I do know is that he insists on an audience with you personally, and he refuses to speak unless he is guaranteed safe passage to King's Landing. We cannot proceed without your leave, for we sense a cunning trap." If your reign is to be stable, we must shine light on these rumors at once. I await your reply and stand ready to send the man under guard if you will have him. Yours in faith, Jon Royce. Jaime's eyes narrowed. Lord Baelish. Even after death, Peter Baelish's shadow lingered, weaving complications in the realm. The man had been cunning, manipulative, and responsible for half the realm's miseries, if the stories were to be believed. Was it some leftover web of his, discovered in the Vale? What does it say? Brienne asked quietly. Jaime passed her the parchment. It seems one of Littlefinger's men has resurfaced, claiming knowledge of a conspiracy against me, or the throne at least. She read it swiftly, lips pressed together. It could be a trick. Could be. Lord Royce is not one for flights of fancy, though. He's cautious, honorable. Do you want to summon this retainer? It may be safer to ignore him, she suggested. Jaime blew out a soft breath. If there's truly a conspiracy among the Vale Lords, ignoring it won't make it vanish. I'll write back, telling Royce to send the man under heavy guard. We'll question him here. Brienne studied his expression, then nodded. I'll help arrange it. Jaime turned to the messenger, who waited anxiously. You've done well. Stay the night. We'll send you back with a reply by dawn. She bowed gratefully. Thank you, your grace. Shortly thereafter, Jaime and Brienne parted ways. He returned to his chambers, penned a swift response to Lord Royce, and handed it to a scribe to prepare for the writer. His mind churned with the possibilities, plots from the Vale, old debts from Baelish's day. Chaos was always stirring somewhere in Westeros, but Jaime had no intention of allowing it to explode unchecked. Exhaustion weighed on him like a millstone, yet sleep proved elusive. He lay in his bed, listening to the hush of the night, remembering how Cersei used to sleep beside him, her presence both comforting and suffocating. Sometimes he missed her scent, her warmth. More often, he felt only the old ache of betrayal. He had loved her and had killed her. His duty demanded it, or so he believed. In the silence of the night, doubt could claw at him, but he tried to silence it by recalling the horrors she would have unleashed if he hadn't stopped her. Eventually, slumber claimed him. But his dreams were restless, images of wildfire, the shriek of ravens, a looming shadow of the Iron Throne. He jolted awake at the first hint of dawn, heart thudding. Another day of rule awaited. Several weeks later, a small party from the Vale arrived in King's Landing. Lord Royce had dispatched 10 men-at-arms, each outfitted in sturdy, plain armor, bearing the sigil of the Bronze Runes. At their center rode a hooded man, stocky and silent. Jaime arranged for them to be greeted at the city gate under the watchful eye of the gold cloaks, then escorted to the Red Keep with discreet caution. In the great hall, Jaime sat on the Iron Throne, flanked by a handful of his Kingsguard, while members of his small council took seats off to the side. The Vale party approached. Lord Parman stood near a pillar, thin lips pursed, ready to glean every nuance. The stocky man bowed low, removing his hood. He had a rough bearded face and small, shifty eyes. A certain wariness clung to him, as though he expected to be executed at any moment. He introduced himself as Garrett Rivers, once a squire in Peter Baelish's service, though from his appearance, enforcer might have been more apt. You've come a long way, Jaime said calmly. Lord Royce writes that you hold crucial information about conspirators in the Vale. Speak plainly. I have little patience for riddles. Garrett Rivers fidgeted. Yes, your grace. I was sworn to Peter Baelish's service. After his downfall, I fled, feared for my life. But I still kept track of certain correspondences, letters that passed between him and some lords in the Vale. He had many plans in motion. Some died with him, but not all. Jaime glanced at Brienne, standing at his right side, then back to the man. Go on. Garrett licked his lips, clearly frightened. In the last letters I saw, Lord Baelish was grooming a faction of Vale lords to topple the Iron Throne if the right conditions arose. He intended to marry Lady Sansa to Harry the Heir once, but that plan fell apart. Still, there were deals about armies, gold, support from Essos. Baelish was cunning. He had contacts among the Iron Bank and among certain Sellsword companies. He promised them future rewards once he seized control through his puppet. Some of the courtiers stirred. The Iron Bank had been a looming presence in Westerosi politics for ages, though less so in recent months, thanks to the crown paying debts promptly with Lannister gold. Jaime frowned. Baelish is dead. How does this help us now? Some of those alliances didn't die with him, Garrett said hurriedly. House Linderly, House Belmore, possibly House Corbray, though they've always been unpredictable. Rumor says they've continued stashing coin, forging alliances across the narrow sea. If the realm grows weak, if your rule falters, they might strike, either to seat a new claimant or simply to carve out the Vale as independent. Peter Baelish taught them how to play both sides. Jaime felt a pang of concern. The Vale had been peaceful enough under Lord Royce's steady hand, with sweet Robin Arryn still alive but sickly. Yet if these smaller houses conspired, the Vale could become a source of rebellion. Why come forward with this now? Jaime demanded. If your loyalties were to Baelish, why betray his old associates? Garrett's eyes darted among the imposing King Guard. I fear for my life, your grace, and I've grown weary of living in shadows. If these lords do move against the crown, they'll not spare a man who knows their secrets. I'd rather be under your protection. In the hush that followed, Jaime surveyed the man. It was possible he was lying to earn favor. But Lord Royce's letter had implied real concern, and the Vale was known for its insular politics, no shortage of ambitious lords wanting more power now that the Arryn line was so weak. Jaime tapped his gold hand against the throne's metal arm. What proof do you have? He asked. Garrett produced a small leather pouch and withdrew several faded letters. He stepped forward tentatively. One of the king's guards seized them to pass them to Jaime, who opened them with Brienne peering over his shoulder. The lettering was undeniably Peter Baelish's, full of careful insinuations and half-promises. References to shipping routes from Bravos, talk of paying certain cells word captains. Another letter contained coded references to feathered falcons that might have pointed to specific Vale houses. Jaime recognized the cunning style from other documents Baelish had penned. He had once glimpsed similar letters in the early days of King's Landing's turmoil. It chilled him how thoroughly the man had tried to spin webs everywhere. He looked up from the letters. You realize forging these would be no small matter, but not impossible. If you've done so, you'll pay with your head. If you're honest, then we may root out a nest of traitors. Garrett's voice shook. I swear on the seven, they're genuine. Jaime nodded, tucking the letters aside for deeper study. Very well. You'll remain in the Red Keep under guard. If your information proves accurate, you'll be rewarded. If not, he left the threat hanging in the air. Relief and fear mingled on Garrett's face as he bowed again, led away by gold cloaks. The great hall was rife with whispers. A few watchers from the small council looked expectantly at Jaime. He straightened, glancing toward Brienne and Lord Parman. We'll investigate these claims quietly. I won't see the realm thrown into another war on the mere word of one man. But we cannot ignore it. Lord Parman inclined his head. I shall discreetly dispatch my agents, your grace. The Vale is not so far that we cannot slip a few whisperers in among the retinues of House Corbray, House Linderly, and House Belmore. Jaime stood from the throne. Do so. I expect a full report soon. Meanwhile, we'll inform Lord Royce that his man is safe here. He should remain watchful. With that, the audience ended and Jaime retreated to his solar. The letters weighed on his mind, a reminder that complacency was dangerous. Peace in Westeros was never simple. Old grudges and cunning plots forever simmered beneath the surface. That night, he studied the letters in greater detail, cross-referencing them with old notes and rumors. Brienne hovered nearby, scanning a second set of correspondences. Each line was crafted with elliptical cleverness, as though Baelish were covering tracks in case the messages fell into the wrong hands. Look at this part, Brienne said, pointing to a line about rousing falcons for the cold winter's night. Could this be a reference to House Arryn itself? Possibly, Jaime mused. Or simply a metaphor for any hawkish Vale lords he was courting. Baelish had a gift for half-truths. He felt a shudder, recalling how the man had turned Sansa Stark's life upside down, manipulated Lysa Arryn, and nearly toppled the North's alliances. He wanted power. If he couldn't have the throne himself, he'd place a puppet. Now that he's gone, the puppet strings dangle, waiting for some clever replacement to seize them. Brienne frowned. Then we must cut those strings. We will, Jaime said firmly, though a tiny voice in his mind asked, at what cost? Another purge of noble houses? Another war? He closed the parchment and tried to quash such thoughts. He was king now, he must do what needed to be done. But he prayed the realm wouldn't be plunged back into chaos. Over the next fortnight, Lord Parman's whisperers discreetly spread through the Vale, posing as merchants, scribes, household guards. Ravens carried coded messages back to King's Landing. The responses were careful, measured, yet troubling. They suggested that indeed some Vale houses, Belmore in particular, had quietly expanded their levies, purchased large shipments of grain, and begun forging alliances with unscrupulous mercenary captains across the narrow sea. Jaime read each report with a mounting sense of unease. Belmore had always been a proud house, occupying strong song in the southwestern foothills of the Vale. Their lord was known for arrogance and a taste for lavish feasts. But if he was forging alliances to challenge the crown, it meant that the realm's peace was even shakier than Jaime had feared. Eventually, a final raven arrived bearing instructions from one of Parman's best spies. Lord Belmore was rumored to be receiving an envoy from a Braavosi Sells word company in the next moon's turn. A perfect chance to confirm traitorous dealings if one could witness that meeting. The location was said to be a remote hunting lodge near the Ares high roads. In the Tower of the Hand, Jaime, Brienne, and Parman pored over the plan. The spy suggested sending a small team, disguised, to catch Lord Belmore red-handed in negotiations. Then they could either arrest him or force him to abandon his scheme. Brienne folded her arms. It's risky. If Belmore is truly plotting, he'll have guards. And if they discover us spying? Jaime's lips pressed tight. Better a small risk now than a larger war later. I'll not launch a full invasion of the Vale without proof. What if you led the party yourself? Parman ventured. That might give you undeniable evidence when you confront him. Brienne's eyes widened in immediate disapproval. You can't be serious. Sending the king into a den of potential traitors? Parman shrugged. Sometimes the direct approach works best. Lord Belmore would never suspect that King Jaime himself would travel in secret. If the king reveals himself at the right moment, Belmore might surrender without a fight. Jaime considered it. He remembered the days when he was a younger man, riding out with the reckless confidence of a knight. Those days seemed far behind him. Yet the idea of slipping out of King's Landing for a swift, covert mission stirred a spark within him. He was no Tywin Lannister, content to scheme from behind a desk. He was Jaime Lannister, once the greatest swordsman in Westeros, reduced now by the loss of his hand, but still formidable. Brienne's voice cut in. It's too dangerous. You've an entire city relying on you. He turned to her, expression firm. And a realm relying on me to handle threats before they fester. If I send others, Belmore might slip away or claim it's all a misunderstanding. A king's presence has weight. She stared at him, concern etched into her features. Then at least let me come with you. He almost smiled. I was going to insist on it. Parman tapped a finger on the table. We keep this quiet. Only a handful of men, all personally vetted. You travel under the guise of a minor retinue, perhaps merchants. We have to time it so you arrive at the hunting lodge shortly before the Braavosi. Capture any documents or witness the exchange. Then we can confront Lord Belmore with undeniable proof. Brienne let out a slow breath. We'll need the best swords and stealth. A large escort will draw attention. Jaime stood, reaching for a map spread across the table. He traced a route from King's Landing around the outskirts of the Riverlands, then north into the Vale's mountain passes. Traveling incognito, we might avoid the main roads. Time is short, though we must intercept them within the next month. We'll want to set out in a few days. Parman nodded, standing as well. I'll see to the arrangements. I'll remain here, of course, to maintain the subterfuge. But I'll have messages waiting for you at certain points. Brienne lifted her gaze to Jaime. This is no small gamble. He locked eyes with her. I know, but if we do nothing, we gamble more. The last thing the realm needs is an armed uprising in the Vale, financed by Braavosi gold. She pressed her lips together, then gave a curt nod. Very well. 3 days later, King Jaime departed King's Landing in the gray light before dawn. He wore drab traveling leathers and a cloak of muted brown, his fine sword carefully sheathed at his side. He brought a small escort of 6 men, among them Brienne and a pair of loyal knights who had fought with him during the Riverlands campaign. All were dressed like ordinary riders, with no Lannister heraldry in sight. They led a packhorse carrying supplies, hoping to pass unnoticed among the travelers on the roads. The journey was sobering. They skirted the edges of the Crownlands, passing villages that still bore the scars of war. Farther north, the terrain grew rugged. Jaime kept his hood pulled low, trusting that not many small folk would recognize him by face alone. Occasionally, they heard rumors in roadside inns of the king's new taxes. Some whispered they were lower than Cersei's, but still burdensome. Of petty bandits harassing travelers. Jaime listened in silence, gleaning what he could of the people's sentiment. At times, he marveled at how it felt to ride in anonymity once more. He had grown used to the formalities of the Red Keep. Now he was jostled in a saddle, breathing dusty air, feeling the ache of long days on the road. It reminded him of the early days of the war, before he lost his hand, before everything changed. But when he flexed his golden fingers, the memory of his transformation came flooding back. He was not that carefree knight anymore. Brienne was a reassuring presence. She rode nearby, scanning the horizon for threats. By night, they made camp off the main road or sought out modest inns. She took the watch herself more often than Jaime would have liked, as though to ensure his safety. At times, he glimpsed a tension in her that spoke to her unwavering sense of duty, or perhaps something more. As they approached the foothills leading into the Vale, the roads twisted upward. The weather turned cooler, the wind sharper. Mountain streams cut through the land, and watchtowers crowned high ridges. They kept to smaller paths, as Parman's spies had instructed. Twice they encountered Vale patrols wearing House Royce sigils, but the knights paid them little mind. Jaime's small group had carefully crafted a story about traveling merchants heading to Gulltown. Eventually, after more than a fortnight of travel, they reached the vicinity of the hunting lodge. According to the intelligence, Lord Belmore's secret meeting with the Braavosi Sells-Words would occur in 2 nights. The lodge was nestled in a forested area south of the high road in a pocket of land rarely patrolled. Jaime and his party found an abandoned farmstead a few miles away and made a discreet camp there. The farmhouse was half collapsed, its roof caved in, but the barn offered some shelter for the horses. By night, they lit only a small, smokeless fire. Brienne and Jaime stood outside, scanning the moonlit fields. "We'll have one chance," Jaime said. "When the Sells-Words arrive, we catch them in the act, or Belmore can claim we're the traitors." Brienne nodded. "We need proof. A letter, a witness, something that shows Belmore is bargaining for arms or funds to defy the crown." Jaime exhaled, feeling a prickle of nerves. "In the best case, we confront him with a show of force. He surrenders. We bring him to justice without bloodshed. And in the worst case," she asked softly. He looked into her eyes. "War." The word fell like a stone in the dark. "If we fail, or if Belmore escapes, the Vale might erupt." She set her jaw. "Then let's not fail." They posted watches and settled in for a restless night. Jaime could hardly sleep, his mind churning with the risk of the next day's plan. He had spent years as a soldier, but a covert operation with so much at stake twisted his stomach in ways he hadn't felt since his youth. At dawn, they scouted the hunting lodge from afar. It was a quaint stone structure with a pitched roof nestled in a clearing of pine and birch. A small stable stood behind it and a dirt path led from the main track. Smoke wafted from the chimney. Through a borrowed spyglass, Jaime saw at least a dozen armed men patrolling, all wearing plain cloaks. Likely Belmore's men or hires from allied houses. By midday, a new party arrived, 5 riders in dark leathers, foreign in cut, the Braavosi Sells-Words. They stabled their mounts and entered the lodge, greeted by a tall man who wore no sigil but carried himself with the arrogance of nobility. Jaime guessed it was Lord Belmore. Jaime's heart pounded. He turned to his own knights and Brienne. "We wait until they're settled. Then we approach quietly. If we can slip inside unseen, we listen, gather proof. Only then do we reveal ourselves." "Understood." They nodded. Weapons were checked. Brienne's sword gleamed, scabbard strapped over her broad shoulders. Jaime's own sword felt heavier than usual, but he forced aside the creeping doubt. This had to be done. As dusk fell, they crept through the trees, leaving 2 men behind to watch the horses. Jaime, Brienne, and 2 knights approached the lodge from the rear. The guard presence was lighter now, with only a few men posted outside. Soft lamplight glowed through the windows. Through the hush of the forest, Jaime could hear muffled voices inside. The aroma of roasted meat drifted on the breeze. One guard leaned against a post near the back door, looking bored. Another circled around front. Jaime gestured. One of his knights, a grizzled man named Ser Ryman, slipped forward and clamped a hand over the guard's mouth, dragging him back into the shadows. Brienne disarmed the man with quick efficiency, rendering him unconscious with a precise blow to the temple. They secured him with rope. Jaime's pulse hammered. So far, so good. They crept to the door, which stood ajar for ventilation. Inside, they heard male voices speaking in the common tongue, spiced with a Braavosi accent. "Gold up front," one Braavosi said. "Half now, half when the job is done." A deeper voice, likely Belmore's, replied, "I can deliver half the coin once the first shipment arrives. Our arrangement." He paused. Footsteps rustled. Jaime inched closer, peering through the gap. Belmore, a barrel-chested man with thinning hair, stood at a table. Across from him were two Sellswords, well-armed, scarred. Papers and coin glittered on the tabletop, a distinct chest full of silver and gold, by the looks of it. Jaime held his breath. This was the proof they needed if Belmore was indeed hiring mercenaries to defy the crown. He caught snatches of speech. No direct assault, mind you, Belmore was saying. We simply need the threat. The king is a Lannister after all, and the Vale grows weary of Lannister dominion. House Belmore stands ready to lead if the king falters. One of the Bravosi let out a low chuckle. We have ships, men, and a desire for profit. That's all. We'll sail up the narrow sea, land near Gulltown if it pleases you. Once we know the crown is vulnerable, we strike. Jaime felt a jolt of anger. Traitorous scum plotting to bring Sellswords onto Westerosi soil. That was all he needed to hear. He glanced at Brienne, who nodded grimly. He pushed the door open, stepping inside. Candlelight fell on his cloaked figure. Belmore and the Bravosi spun around, hands darting to weapons. Two more Sellswords stood behind them. Jaime threw back his hood, letting them see his face. Plotting a rebellion, Belmore, he said coolly. And you do it in my realm? Belmore's eyes bulged. 7 hells, he barked, lurching back in shock. The Bravosi Sellswords cursed in their own tongue, drawing steel. A swirl of confusion erupted, chairs scraping, the table tipping. Brienne and the knights burst in behind Jaime, weapons ready. Lay down your arms, she shouted, her voice booming. One Sellsword foolishly rushed forward. Brienne parried his strike with shocking speed, then slammed the pommel of her sword into his temple. Another Sellsword lunged at Jaime. With his golden hand, Jaime deflected the man's arm, using his steel blade to knock the sword aside. A second strike from Jaime's ally, Ser Ryman, felled the attacker with a grunt. Belmore scrambled back, knocking coins from the table. Stop, stop, he cried, panic in his voice. No bloodshed. We can talk. But the Bravosi had no intention of surrendering easily. Two of them exchanged a glance and bolted for the side door, presumably trying to flee. Brienne let out a warning, but there were too many for them to block. One knight chased after them while Jaime cornered Belmore, sword pointed at his chest. You dare attempt to bring foreign Sellswords to fight your king? Jaime snarled. I should have your head here and now. Belmore's face was pale, sweat beading on his brow. Why, you don't understand. The Vale, Lord Aaron, is weak. I was only preparing for the future, in case your reign collapsed. I never intended to openly rebel. Jaime's anger flared. Lies. I heard enough. You meant to land these swords in Gulltown, sow chaos, hold the Vale for yourself. No, please. Belmore's voice cracked. You're the king. Have mercy. Io. He was cut off by a sudden commotion at the doorway. One of the Bravosi, wounded, staggered back in, grappling with the knight who had chased him. The Sellsword broke free and lunged at Jaime's unprotected flank. Brienne saw it first and thrust her blade forward, intercepting his strike. Steel met steel in a ringing clash, sparks flying. Jaime twisted just in time. The Sellsword's sword scraped across Jaime's golden hand, leaving a gouge in the polished metal. Jaime pivoted, ramming his shoulder into the man's chest. He heard the Sellsword's gasp as he stumbled, and Jaime's sword found his side. The man slumped with a groan. Panting, Jaime turned back to Belmore, who stood trembling, hands raised. I yield. I yield. Outside, more shouting erupted as the rest of Belmore's men discovered the intrusion. But Jaime's other knights rushed in, ensuring the perimeter was held. A short, desperate skirmish followed. In minutes, it ended with the Sellswords either dead or captured, Belmore's men likewise subdued. The entire lodge reeked of sweat, blood, and spilled ale. When the dust settled, Jaime stood over Belmore, who lay on the floor, cringing. Brienne hovered near, sword still drawn, chest heaving from exertion. Your Grace, Belmore whimpered, I beg for forgiveness. I was in. Be silent, Jaime snapped. He looked to Brienne. We have letters, gold, a chest of coin. Proof enough. The man's an open traitor. She nodded, giving Belmore a look of disgust. What do you intend to do? Jaime paused, eyes cold. He recalled how Tywin Lannister would have handled this, a swift execution to set an example. He recalled Cersei's methods, cruelty, and fear. But he also remembered why he had seized the throne, to prevent another reign of terror. Still, treason was treason. He turned to one of his knights. Bind him. Gather the documents. We ride for the area at once. Lord Royce must know of this, and we'll see Belmore answer for his crimes before the Vale's rightful authorities and the crown. Belmore looked ready to protest, but Jaime shot him a glare that silenced any plea. If you cooperate, Jaime said, voice icily calm, perhaps the headsman's axe will be merciful. With that, Brienne and the knights secured the scene. The surviving Braavosi Sel's words were also bound, though one was so badly wounded he might not survive the journey. They would be turned over to Royce or taken to King's Landing, whichever Jaime decided once the Vale's leadership was informed. Jaime felt his heart still pounding, adrenaline coursing. He glanced at Brienne, who offered him a tight, weary nod. He was grateful for her presence, for the unwavering strength she provided and the moral compass she represented. "Let's go," he said, stepping over the scattered coins. "We have a traitor to deliver." Riding up the steep mountain road to the Eyrie, Jaime felt a mixture of triumph and dread. They had discovered Belmore's treason, but exposing him so brazenly could spark further unrest. House Belmore was not the most powerful in the Vale, but it had ties to others. And the presence of foreign Sel's words in a conspiracy was sure to spread panic. Word traveled swiftly. By the time Jaime and his small retinue approached the Bloody Gate, a massive fortress guarding the pass to the Eyrie, Lord Royce himself was there to greet them, accompanied by a detachment of men-at-arms. Royce was a stern figure in bronze armor, his gray beard framing an unyielding mouth. He offered Jaime a stiff bow. "Your Grace, you come with unwelcome tidings, I gather." Jaime dismounted. Belmore, bound and sullen, was dragged off his horse. Brienne and the knights showed Lord Royce the confiscated chest of coin, along with the incriminating letters. Royce's face darkened as he took in the evidence. "I suspected something foul in the Vale, but I did not expect open treachery on this scale. House Belmore will answer for this." Belmore sputtered. It was only a precaution, a plan should the king. Royce's glare silenced him. "You've spat on your oaths, Belmore. You will stand trial before the Vale's lords and the king himself." It was decided that Belmore would be confined at the Bloody Gate until a formal hearing could be arranged. The Braavosi mercenaries would face Vale justice as well. Jaime intended to remain long enough to ensure the matter was settled and to quell any chance of more rebellion. He also wished to speak with Sweetrob and Arryn, or those who governed in his name, to secure their loyalty to the crown. That night, Lord Royce offered Jaime the hospitality of the gate's austere halls. While not as grand as the Eyrie, the fortress had sturdy chambers for honored guests. Over supper, they discussed the ramifications of Belmore's treachery. Brienne sat at Jaime's side, the Vale officers gathered around. "There may be more conspirators," Lord Royce said. "Corbray is another possibility. That house has often wavered on the edge of dishonor. Lady Anya Waynwood once endured Baelish's manipulations, but I'm not sure she'd ever align with Belmore." Jaime nodded grimly. "We'll find out soon enough. Once we hold this trial, any allies might reveal themselves in defense of Belmore." Royce grunted. "Then let them. We Vale lords will not suffer treachery lightly. And I trust you'll be firm, your grace." "Firm?" Jaime stared at the fire crackling in the hearth. "I will be," he said, though inside he wondered if he'd be forced to make an example of Belmore. He could already hear the voices at court urging him to punish treason with severity. The next day, they ascended to the Eyrie. The climb was steep and treacherous, but the weather was mild for that time of year. Mules carried supplies, while Jaime and Brienne rode sure-footed mountain horses borrowed from Royce's stable. The Eyrie soared above them, perched atop a sheer peak like a stone eagle. One might have called it beautiful if it weren't so daunting. Jaime wondered how he had never visited it before. He recalled that Tyrion had once been imprisoned in its sky cells, an experience that nearly cost him his life. Upon arriving, they were greeted by a young steward who led them through airy courtyards and slender halls. The Eyrie, though smaller than some castles, was a marvel. Marble floors, tall windows letting in crisp mountain air, walls hung with falcon banners. The steward explained that Lord Robert Arryn, still a frail youth, remained in his bedchamber under the care of a maester. It was widely known the boy suffered from poor health and was easily frightened. Jaime was escorted to a spacious solar to wait for Lord Royce and a few other Vale lords. Brienne stayed by his side, both of them gazing out a high window at the breathtaking drop of the mountains of the moon. In time, Royce arrived with Lady Anya Waynwood, a severe matron with iron-gray hair, and Ser Lothia Brune, who had once served Baelish but later professed loyalty to House Arryn. They bowed to Jaime. "Your Grace," said Lady Waynwood in a raspy voice, "I offer regrets that our Vale harbored the snake, Belmore. We stand with House Arryn and by extension with the crown. That you yourself uncovered this treachery speaks to your resolve." She gave a small, acknowledging nod. Jaime inclined his head in thanks, though inwardly he mused on how all these lords and ladies had once been tangled in Baelish's games. Now they scurried to affirm loyalty, mindful of the king's wrath. "I appreciate your support, my lady. We must arrange a gathering of the Vale's principal lords to hold a proper trial. Belmore should face open justice." Royce exchanged a look with Waynwood. "I'll dispatch ravens at once, calling the lords to the Eyrie. The boy, Lord Robert, will preside in name, though I suspect he won't say much. Then let it be so, Jaime said. The sooner, the better. I'll remain here until it's done. They discussed logistics. Vale lords were scattered among various holdings and some would need weeks to arrive. Ser Lothia Brune offered to oversee Belmore's confinement. Jaime accepted, and by the meeting's end, it was agreed that a trial would take place in 2 weeks' time, giving the major houses time to send a representative. When the meeting concluded, Brienne asked quietly if they might pay their respects to Robert Arryn. Lord Royce consented. The boy lord was sequestered in a turret chamber tended by Maester Colm. The maester met them at the door, pressing a finger to his lips. Lord Robert is asleep, he murmured. He's been ill of late. Terrible headaches, difficulty breathing in this altitude. Jaime raised an eyebrow. He'd heard rumors about the boy's fragility since his infancy. We mean not to disturb him too greatly. Just a word, if possible. The maester hesitated, then let them enter the dim, perfumed chamber. Robert Arryn lay on a canopied bed, a pale slip of a youth, perhaps 15, though he looked younger. Dark circles smudged his eyes. At Jaime's approach, he stirred, blinking in confusion. This is King Jaime, my lord, the maester said softly. He wishes to greet you. Robert's eyes flickered with a childlike mix of awe and apprehension. The king, he murmured. My mother said once that the Lannisters were cruel. His voice was frail, almost pitiful. Jaime's jaw tightened at the mention of Lysa Arryn, Catelyn Stark's sister, who had been enthralled by Baelish. Summer, Jaime said gently. I've done my share of cruelty, but I'm here to keep peace in the Vale. The boy gazed at the ceiling, seeming only half-lucid. I don't want war, it makes my head hurt. The Vale is mine, but they never let me ride the mountain, never let me fly. His voice faded in a dreamy haze. Mother said the Eyrie would keep me safe from all below. Something twisted in Jaime's chest, a pang of pity. This boy lord was in no condition to truly rule. The Vale was governed by the likes of Royce and Waynwood, who used Robert's name to maintain stability. Rest, Jaime said softly. We'll handle everything. Robert's eyes closed. The maester stepped forward, ushering Jaime and Brienne away. Outside, in the corridor, Brienne sighed. That poor boy. He's more a prisoner of his own body than a lord of the Vale. Jaime nodded solemnly. It's no wonder ambitious men like Belmore think they can do as they please. I only hope we can restore order here without bloodshed. The next weeks in the Eyrie were tense. Ravens flew in and out, and the mountainous roads brought in small retinues of Vale lords summoned for the trial. Lady Waynwood arrived with a small guard. House Grafton of Gulltown sent a cousin to represent them. Even House Corbray's emissary appeared, wearing a perpetual sneer. Belmore remained locked in a tower cell, not permitted visitors, though Jaime was certain messages must be slipping through cracks. The castle's courtyard grew crowded with knights, horses, banners. The air seemed electric with the knowledge that a king was present to judge treason. Jaime spent his days meeting with the lords, reaffirming alliances, calming nerves. At night, he found himself in a spare solar, reading reports from King's Landing, where the small council continued to govern in his absence, and from other regions. He read that the Stormlands under Gendry Baratheon remained stable, that Sansa Stark in the north had reaffirmed a pact of mutual cooperation, that a minor dispute in the Westerlands had been settled in his name. Occasionally, a pang of relief coursed through him. His absence hadn't toppled the realm. He had chosen capable people, apparently. Brienne was often at his side, acting as both bodyguard and confidant. The two shared measured conversations about the future of the Vale, the precarious nature of Robert's rule, and the necessity of punishing Belmore. Some nights, they walked along the Eyrie's slender parapets, gazing at the dizzying drop of the mountains below. Jaime confided in her that the Iron Throne still felt like a burden, that he sometimes questioned whether he was truly doing what was best for Westeros. She encouraged him, reminding him how far the realm had come since the dark days of Cersei's near destruction. At last, the day of the trial arrived. The High Hall of the Eyrie, where once Tyrion Lannister had faced Lysa Arryn's accusations, was arranged for the occasion. Robert Arryn sat in a carved stone seat atop a dais, pale and trembling. Lord Royce stood beside him as protector, while Lady Waynwood and other Vale lords filled seats of honor. Jaime, as king, stood to one side, wearing a simple circlet of gold that marked his station. Brienne and 2 knights stood behind him, watchful. Belmore was brought in under heavy guard. His face was drawn, though he tried to maintain an air of wounded dignity. When the charges were read, high treason, conspiracy with foreign cells words, there were murmurs of outrage from some of the assembled Vale lords. Others looked uneasy, perhaps wondering if their names might also come to light. Lord Royce called for Belmore to speak in his defense. Belmore cast a pleading glance at the dais. I did only what I thought best for the Vale, with the boy lord too weak to protect us from Lannister oppression. He shot a glare at Jaime. Is it wrong to ensure our safety if the Iron Throne fell into chaos again, as it has before? A hush followed. Jaime heard a faint sniffle from Robert Arryn, who whispered something inaudible to Royce. Lord Royce cleared his throat. You formed an alliance with Selzwards to challenge the crown. That is no mere precaution, it is treason. Have you what else to say? Belmore tried to protest further, but he was drowned out by lords demanding punishment, a few crying out for clemency, others for a swift beheading. The hall rumbled with anger and tension. Jaime raised a hand and silence gradually fell. He stepped forward, voice echoing. Lord Belmore plotted to bring Selzwards onto Westerosi soil to overthrow a lawful monarch. He was caught red-handed. By all rights, that is a hanging offense. A ripple of anxiety coursed through the onlookers. But I am not here to punish the Vale as a whole, only the traitor who threatened its stability. Let all see that the crown does not permit rebellion, but also does not seek to crush the Vale. Our interests are aligned. He turned to Robert Arryn, who blinked, glancing uncertainly at Royce. Jaime softened his tone. Lord Robert, the decision is yours, but I stand ready to enforce the king's justice. Robert's mouth opened and closed helplessly. Lord Royce leaned in, whispering something. At length, the boy lord managed a reedy pronouncement. B. Belmore is guilty. He must answer with his life. A cold hush spread. Belmore's face went ashen, he sank to his knees, trembling. Mercy, he mouthed soundlessly, but no one came to his aid. Lady Waynwood looked on, stony-eyed. The other lords seemed to accept the sentence. Jaime forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He had known it would come to this, or something close to it. Treason demanded a price, or the realm would see him as weak. Perhaps, he told himself, this would deter future conspirators and preserve the peace he had struggled to maintain. He nodded to Lord Royce. Then it is decided. Have him taken to the Moon Door. The Ares Moon Door was infamous, a narrow door in the floor of the high hall that opened onto nothing but air. Condemned prisoners were sometimes flown to their deaths on the rocks far below. Belmore began to plead and wail, but the guards dragged him inexorably to the center of the hall. Jaime watched, his heart pounding with grim inevitability. The door was pulled open, revealing the dizzying drop. A bitter wind whistled up. Belmore's cries turned to terrified shrieks. The lords looked on, some grim, some satisfied, some uneasy. Robert Arryn turned his face away, clutching at Royce's sleeve. Jaime maintained a stoic facade, though inside he felt a swirl of anger and sorrow. This was the cost of rule, blood for peace, fear for order. The guards thrust Belmore forward. With one final shriek, he tumbled out of sight, his voice cut off by the endless drop. Silence reigned, broken only by the wind's moan. Jaime exhaled, feeling ill, but also knowing it was done. Another would-be traitor removed, another threat to the realm snuffed out. He turned to the gathered lords. Let all see the fate of those who threaten the crown. Yet let all also see we hold no quarrel with loyal vassals. The Vale stands under the realm's protection as it always has. Most nodded. Some wore uneasy expressions as though reminded that the king was still a Lannister, capable of deadly force when roused. Perhaps that was for the best. Fear could serve as well as love when it came to maintaining stability. The trial ended. The Ares halls buzzed with conversation, lords discussing the outcome, servants hurrying to return furniture and tidy up. Jaime felt drained, numb. Brienne caught his arm gently as the hall emptied. Are you all right? He inhaled a shaky breath. I did what had to be done. He gave me no choice. The words sounded familiar, he'd once told himself that about Cersei. Yet each time, the weight grew heavier. Brienne's eyes shone with understanding. You're a king, Jaime. There are no easy choices. He mustered a half-smile, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. You're right, he murmured. They remained at the area a few more days, finalizing details. The Vale lords pledged renewed loyalty, none daring to voice rebellion after witnessing Belmore's fate. Lord Royce assured Jaime that the Vale would henceforth be quiet. Meanwhile, word spread that the king had personally rooted out a traitor, further burnishing Jaime's reputation in some corners as a decisive monarch and in others as a man unafraid to spill blood. At last, it was time to depart. Jaime bid farewell to Lord Robert, who barely acknowledged him, and thanked Royce for his cooperation. Lady Waynwood offered a curt nod, apparently relieved that the crisis had ended with minimal collateral damage. As Jaime and Brienne rode from the Eyrie, escorted by a small band of Vale Knights to the Bloody Gate, the morning sun illuminated the winding passes below. The crisp air was almost exhilarating, and Jaime tried to quell the lingering ache in his chest. Another threat quashed, another victory for the realm's fragile peace. At the bloody gate, Royce offered a final salute. "Farewell, your grace. The veil stands with you. May the path ahead be smoother." "I hope so," Jaime replied solemnly. They rode on, beginning the descent back toward King's Landing. Once beyond earshot, Brienne spoke quietly. "You did well, considering the circumstances. You prevented a larger conspiracy." Jaime set his jaw. "Yes, but at a cost. The realm is safe for now, but I can't help wondering how many more plots remain, and how many more heads I'll have to take." She let the silence speak for a moment, then said, "Every ruler faces that question. Even the best kings can't avoid blood entirely." He gave a bitter chuckle. "The best kings? I doubt that's what people call me." "Some might," she said softly. "It depends on what you do next." Jaime glanced at her, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. He remembered their time on the road, how they'd once loathed each other, then formed an unlikely camaraderie. Now, she was one of the few people he trusted completely. "Then let's ride," he said, tapping his horse's flank. "The realm is waiting for us. Whether they love or hate me, they'll want to see their king on the Iron Throne again." They set off at a canter, the road snaking down the rugged mountains. Jaime squinted against the bright sky, thoughts churning like the wind that whipped past. He had spared the city from wildfire, claimed the throne, crushed a rebellion in the Riverlands, thwarted a traitor in the Vale. Yet the realm's future still felt tenuous. Alliances might crumble at the next sign of weakness. He would need to be vigilant, cunning, and, when necessary, merciless. Could he maintain that balance? For the moment, at least, the realm seemed to inch closer to stability. Soon he would return to King's Landing, slip into the routine of governance once more, pass new edicts, settle disputes among the lords. But in quiet hours, he would reflect on the price he had paid and the price still to come. High above, a falcon soared, circling the cliff edges. Jaime watched it with a pang of envy, free, unbound by thrones or crowns, by swords or golden hands. Just for an instant, he longed to be that falcon. But then the moment passed, and he rode on, a king bound to his duty, forging a peace in a land that had seen too little of it. If the gods were good, perhaps he could steer Westeros to calmer waters. If they were cruel, more storms lay ahead. Either way, Jaime Lannister would face them as he had faced everything else, with a sword in one hand, gold or flesh, and the weight of the realm on his shoulders. So long as he drew breath, he would not let the Seven Kingdoms slip into the madness he had killed Cersei to prevent. In that resolve, he found a sliver of solace. And so the tale continued, with King Jaime riding back toward the city he had sacrificed everything to protect, uncertain yet determined, carrying the silent burden of his sins and the realm's precarious hopes.